Glass rained from a half-felled office tower when a Vought-staged rescue went wrong, pyrotechnics igniting a column of fire that braided through the plaza. Live feeds surged as executives ordered more spectacle, and the crowd turned from panic to a new, televised choreography of fear. In the middle of that engineered apocalypse, a bald man in a plain yellow suit stepped forward with a supermarket bag, unhurried and plainly bored. He closed a space between two collapsing beams with a gesture so small it looked like annoyance, and the sound of the city stopped to measure itself against him. What followed would be lawsuits, hashtags, sponsored vigils, legal threats, and a smear campaign that would push the system into a mode it had never needed to practice before. Vought's cameras found a product. Homelander felt a flicker of interest. Governments started drafting talking points, and none of them realized that what they were about to sell could not be owned. This was only the beginning, and worse was coming. This is a warning. Watch closely and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear matters, and ignoring it will not make its consequences disappear. Remember this episode. What Vought engineers today will change how power is sold tomorrow, and that change will find you. By the time the second facade gave way, Vought's emergency coordinators had already begun rewriting the narrative they would broadcast within the hour, shifting blame from faulty rigging to an unexpected terrorist catalyst that would justify a more dramatic response package. The plaza had been scheduled for a clean, photogenic rescue led by B-tier subs meant to boost midweek engagement. But when the charges blew too hot and the scaffolding twisted inward, the event stopped being a show and became something the legal team would later call an uncontrolled asset demonstration. In the chaos of falling steel and coughing smoke, a man in a yellow suit stood at the edge of a taped-off perimeter, watching a bent light pole sway as though it were a metronome for the city's panic. He was holding a grocery bag that rustled whenever the wind cut down the avenue, and the bag's ordinary sound was somehow louder than the sirens that were beginning to choke the streets. The first camera that caught him didn't know it had found the story's center, because there was nothing to brand in the way he moved, nothing to dramatize about the way he leaned forward and pushed a descending girder back into the geometry of the building, as if he were closing a stubborn drawer. When the support column snapped under its own misaligned weight, he reached out with the same absent motion someone might use to stop an elevator door, and the collapse stalled long enough for the trapped maintenance crew to stumble free. The dust cleared in a way that looked staged but wasn't, and the live feed lingered on a man who didn't strike a pose, didn't acknowledge applause, and didn't even look toward the drones that were circling for better angles. He set the bag down, brushed concrete from his glove, and asked no one in particular if the sale on leaks would still be on after the commotion. Inside a Vought control room several blocks away, handlers started speaking over each other in the clipped tones of people who recognized a licensing opportunity before they recognized a liability. They saw a silhouette that could be simplified, a palette that could be inverted for summer lines, and a face that was almost offensively easy to reproduce on lunchboxes. The first instruction was not to approach him with security, but to approach him with paperwork, which was routed through 3 departments before anyone asked what his name was. A junior producer suggested that they could debut him as a surprise affiliate, a late addition to the lineup that would make the fiasco look like foresight, and an executive agreed before confirming whether he was on payroll. On a nearby rooftop, Homelander watched the same feed on a delay, his curiosity settling into irritation as he noticed that the bald man never once looked toward the lens that would have given the moment a climax. He had seen amateurs bask in adoration and professionals cultivate it, but this was something else entirely, a kind of indifference that read as contempt when refracted through a hierarchy built on being seen. The plaza's narrative was slipping from something that could be corrected in post to something that had already begun to rewrite the terms of attention. And attention was a currency he did not permit to be devalued. When the rescued workers began thanking a man who had already turned away to retrieve his groceries, the irritation sharpened into a need to be present. Meanwhile, a black sedan idled 2 streets over as Billy Butcher watched an unbranded clip cycle through a private channel, his skepticism rising with each replay of the same unimpressive gesture that had nonetheless stopped a structural failure mid-fall. The footage didn't match the profiles he'd memorized or the patterns he'd learned to expect from Vaught's testbeds, because there was no flourish to analyze and no tell to catalog. If this was a plan, it was a strange one, operating without an obvious objective and ignoring the easy wins that came with being recognized. He told Huey Campbell to flag the timestamps and find out why the network had begun scrubbing amateur angles that showed the man leaving instead of staying for the applause. Back at the site, a Vought liaison finally made contact in the way Vought always did, with a smile calibrated to imply partnership and a contract phrase to imply inevitability. The man in yellow listened with the same patience he gave to weather reports, nodding when the words hero tiering and brand alignment passed by as if they were forecasts he could ignore. When asked for a name, he said Saitama, in a tone that suggested the conversation was already finished, then bent to pick up a leak that had rolled from the bag during the commotion. The liaison pivoted to talking points about endorsements and structured appearances, about the way a marketable presence could help the public process what they had just seen. Saitama asked if there would be snacks at any interviews they scheduled, which the liaison mistook for consent and relayed upward as a soft agreement pending legal confirmation. Within minutes, a draft logo existed in 3 colorways, and a slogan about effortless safety was floated to a focus group that had never heard his name an hour before. The city exhaled as emergency crews reclaimed the narrative space, yet the feeds that mattered had already begun to edit him into a role he had not asked for. When Homelander arrived above the plaza to provide the reassurance that always came with his shadow, the crowd's gaze split for the first time in years. He hovered long enough to make the point, then descended with a smile that had anchored 1,000 campaigns, offering the kind of public gratitude that doubled as a claim. Saitama accepted it as though it were a weather update, thanked him for the information, and asked whether the supermarket across the avenue was still open. The smile held, but the cameras caught the microsecond where it had to be reapplied, and the control room went quiet as analysts recognized a new variable they could not brief away. In the hours that followed, Vought would announce an exploratory partnership. The networks would roll B-roll of a man who never performed for them, and a hierarchy that depended on reaction would meet someone who had none. By evening, the first teaser spot had already been cut, and a tagline was testing higher than expected among demographics that normally ignored hero content. The boys would find that the raw footage contradicted the ad, the government would schedule a hearing it didn't know how to frame, and Homelander would request a private meeting that could not be spun as collegial. As the city lights came back online and the plaza was cleared for morning traffic, a new campaign went live without a signature. Vaught's response to the plaza incident was not to slow the narrative down, but to accelerate it past the point where questions could form, which meant announcing a public demonstration before anyone outside their legal department had agreed on what Saitama was supposed to be demonstrating. The invitation described a controlled training exercise designed to reassure citizens after the terrorist-adjacent malfunction, and it promised a cooperative appearance by Vaught's most trusted heroes to model unity. What it did not mention was the internal directive to capture Saitama performing something that could be cut into a repeatable brand beat, a gesture or a line that would function across languages and demographics. By mid-morning, an entire block had been converted into a camera-friendly proving ground, with reinforced drones hovering at preset heights and a collapsible set meant to mimic a high-rise under stress. Saitama arrived because the liaison had said there would be snacks, and he stood at the edge of the marked zone with the same grocery bag from yesterday, watching technicians recalibrate pyrotechnics that were never meant to be used this close to the public. He asked where the food table was, then nodded when someone pointed to a tent that had been positioned for sponsor visibility rather than convenience. When a coordinator suggested he step onto a logo printed on the asphalt, he did so without comment, his gaze drifting toward a hot dog cart that had been pushed back by security. The countdown began not because he was ready, but because the network had already cut to a wide shot. On a raised platform, Homelander addressed the crowd with a tone that balanced reassurance and ownership, explaining that Vought's newest affiliate would be participating in a friendly test to illustrate cooperative safety. The speech framed Saitama as an eager addition to a system that had long understood the burden of strength, and it invited applause for a partnership that did not exist outside a draft contract. When the first stage element collapsed on cue, Homelander intercepted a falling slab with a practiced flourish, pausing just long enough for the cameras to savor the strain he performed so well. The crowd reacted exactly as they had been trained to react, and the analysts in the control room marked the spike in engagement. The second collapse was meant for Saitama, a lighter structure that could be caught and held, while he delivered a line about preparedness that the writers had placed on a teleprompter near eye level. He looked toward the tent instead, then reached out to steady the structure with the same absent motion he had used at the plaza, not holding it so much as returning it to where it had been a moment before. The teleprompter scrolled through its cue, found no audience, and continued anyway, the words about partnership drifting across a face that never read them. When asked to repeat the action for a closer angle, he asked if the hot dogs were free. The request made it into a boom mic that was not meant to be live, and the clip would later be reinterpreted as charming humility by a marketing team that had already begun designing a limited edition condiment line. On the platform, Homelander laughed in a way that suggested mentorship, then invited Saitama to try a more demanding task that had been held in reserve for a finale. The finale was a reinforced drone programmed to simulate an uncontrolled dive, its descent plotted to intersect with the logo at a speed that would require visible effort to arrest. The directors wanted a catch that would echo across highlight reels for weeks. Saitama watched the drone's approach as though it were a paper bag caught in an updraft, and when it entered the zone, he tapped it once, gently enough that the onboard gyros stabilized before anyone could register a save. The machine rose back to its holding pattern, its error logs filled with data that would later be classified as anomalous interference, and the crowd hesitated because the expected struggle had not been provided. Homelander stepped in to complete the beat, plucking a second drone from the air with a show of force that returned the script to something recognizable. The applause followed him, but the analysts noticed it was thinner than the first. Across the street, Huey Campbell watched through a telephoto lens as Saitama drifted toward the snack tent, accepting a hot dog with the same neutrality he had shown the contract. Billy Butcher stood beside him, noting how the man ignored a handler's attempt to reposition him for a sponsor backdrop, and instead asked whether there was mustard. The ad copy they had leaked earlier that morning described a disciplined recruit ready to embody Vought's values, but the person in the frame behaved like someone who had wandered into a street fair by accident. The inconsistency was not subtle, and it made the scrubbing of amateur angles look less like brand protection and more like concealment. By late afternoon, the network had cut a sizzle reel that replaced Saitama's silence with voiceover, stitching his presence into a narrative of initiative and alignment that would debut during primetime. A stylized emblem had been finalized, its simplicity meant to echo the man's own, and a slogan about safety without effort had tested well among parents who had never heard him speak. In a private room above the set, Homelander requested that future demonstrations emphasize hierarchy, his concern framed as a matter of public clarity. The request was logged as reasonable, then routed to a team tasked with finding a way to make indifference look like teamwork. As the crowd dispersed and the drones powered down, Vought's legal department drafted language that would allow them to speak on Saitama's behalf, until a formal agreement could be reached. Government observers in the back rows filed reports that avoided conclusions but requested further review, and an advisory committee scheduled a preliminary session on unregistered exceptional actors. Saitama finished his hot dog, asked if there were seconds, and left before anyone could offer him a ride. The teaser went live that night with his silhouette at the center. By the following morning, Vought had moved from improvisation to architecture, building an entire internal framework around a man who had not signed anything and had already left 2 scheduled follow-ups without realizing they were scheduled at all. The overnight metrics had come in with a contradiction that made the analytics team uneasy, because unaided recognition for Saitama's silhouette had spiked across demographics that usually ignored hero content. Yet sentiment analysis attached no aspirational language to his name. People were not saying they wanted to be like him. They were saying they trusted what they thought he had done, which was an outcome that could not be reliably monetized without first being defined. A working group was assembled to translate trust into purchasable reassurance, and the first order of business was deciding how much of his behavior needed to be corrected for the sake of consistency. The solution they settled on was not to correct Saitama directly, but to correct the record around him, which meant deploying a voice he had never used across interviews he would never attend. Within hours, a press release described him as a volunteer affiliate who had chosen to work under Vought's ethical framework while he evaluated a permanent role, and the networks rolled clips of his demonstration with captions that suggested mentorship. The teleprompter lines he had ignored were read by a narrator whose tone implied consent, and the absence of resistance was framed as humility rather than disinterest. Legal drafted a provisional likeness agreement that would allow Vought to speak in the first person during crisis briefings, and the marketing team began testing a line of emergency kits branded with his emblem. When a liaison finally located Saitama at a neighborhood supermarket, he listened to a summary of his new responsibilities with the same attention he gave to price tags, nodding when told that appearances could be rescheduled around his personal commitments. He asked whether the appearances would interfere with sale days, then considered the answer as if it were a minor inconvenience that might be offset by a coupon. The liaison explained that Vought would handle all communications on his behalf to reduce stress, which Saitama accepted as long as it did not require him to miss the discount on eggs. The agreement they emailed that afternoon would later be cited in 3 different hearings as evidence of cooperation. On a secure floor, Homelander reviewed a draft campaign that paired his image with Saitama, under a banner about unity, and his irritation matured into a quiet insistence that the pairing be temporary. He framed the concern as a matter of public comprehension, explaining that audiences needed to understand where leadership resided in a crisis. The executives agreed in principle, while instructing editors to keep the silhouettes equal in height for now, pending further data. A memo circulated suggesting that Saitama's calm could be leveraged as a stabilizing presence during Homelander's more visible interventions. Elsewhere, Billy Butcher watched a morning show host attribute a quote to Saitama that had never been recorded, praising Vought's oversight in language that felt like it had been workshopped for a week. Huey Campbell pulled the raw feeds they had captured at the demonstration and found no audio that matched the clip, which meant someone had begun manufacturing a voice for a man who did not offer one. The implication was not that Vought had found a recruit, but that it had decided to proceed as if it had, which made the man in yellow either a collaborator or a casualty. They scheduled surveillance not because they trusted him, but because the alternative was worse. By midday, government liaisons had requested a briefing on unregistered exceptional actors, citing the rapid growth of Saitama-branded search queries and the absence of a licensing trail. Vought's response emphasized voluntary alignment and ongoing evaluation, noting that early partnerships often required flexibility, while talent adjusted to structured service. A proposed regulatory pathway was attached that would formalize affiliate status without triggering the oversight reserved for independent subs, and a staffer underlined the phrase, temporary accommodation. The committee agreed to postpone action pending a public demonstration of compliance. Compliance was defined that afternoon as an interview conducted by proxy, with a spokesperson answering questions about Saitama's motivations, while B-roll showed him buying vegetables. The segment trended for reasons no one could quite explain, because the reassurance it offered felt less like a performance and more like an interruption of one. Focus groups reported that the lack of bravado made the brand feel honest, which the brand team translated into a directive to minimize overt heroics in future cuts. A slogan about quiet protection replaced the earlier line, and pre-orders for the emergency kits opened before the segment had finished airing. When the liaison called to confirm Saitama's availability for a charity gala, he asked if there would be air conditioning and whether the buffet included noodles, then declined when told it was a standing event. The decline was reframed as a scheduling conflict in a release that praised his dedication to ongoing community patrols, and a photo from the supermarket was captioned as evidence of outreach. In a private note, Homelander requested a joint appearance to clarify the chain of command, and the request was approved with a date attached. That evening, a revised contract was delivered to Saitama's apartment with a basket of branded snacks, and the neighbors would later recall seeing him accept the food while leaving the envelope unopened. Vought's legal team interpreted acceptance as goodwill, and the campaign expanded accordingly. By nightfall, a primetime spot aired that introduced Saitama as a partner in everything but name, and a hearing was scheduled to ratify what had already been announced. The shift from campaign to environment began quietly, with municipal partnerships that replaced generic safety signage across the city with Vought-approved messaging that featured Saitama's silhouette in calming colors. Subway platforms that once displayed evacuation maps now alternated with a minimalist emblem above phrases about quiet protection, and bus shelters looped a 30-second spot that described cooperative vigilance without ever showing him speaking. The reframing was not presented as advertising, but as a public service initiative designed to reduce panic during emergencies, which allowed it to bypass the scrutiny applied to overt sponsorships. Within a week, the city began to feel like it had already agreed to something it had never been asked to consider. At street level, the change altered how incidents were reported, because bystanders began describing routine interventions as if they had been coordinated through an invisible program. A man who had slipped from a scaffolding claimed that a yellow figure had stabilized the situation, and the local station captioned the clip with language about affiliate response times. When Saitama asked a parking attendant whether a ticket could be waived because he had been helping someone with groceries, the attendant took a photo and posted it under a hashtag that Vought had seeded the night before. The story traveled faster than the truth, and by the time it reached the evening news, it had become an example of structured compassion. In a glass-walled conference room, Homelander watched a heat map that showed engagement drifting towards Saitama's calm interventions and away from his own dramatic rescues, which the analytics team described as fatigue-resistant. He requested a coordinated patrol designed to highlight leadership under pressure, suggesting a scenario that would require visible hierarchy to resolve. The planners agreed while nodding that the public's preference for low-intensity reassurance might complicate the optics. A rehearsal was scheduled for a joint appearance in a district where signage had already been updated. Meanwhile, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell tracked a series of minor incidents that had been attributed to affiliate presence despite the absence of any official deployment. The pattern suggested that Vought's narrative was beginning to operate independently of the man it featured, assigning intent where there had only been proximity. When a bakery fire was reported as contained by Saitama's network, they pulled the raw dispatch logs and found no record of his involvement beyond a purchase made an hour earlier. The inconsistency pointed to a system that preferred alignment to accuracy. City council members, eager to demonstrate partnership, announced a pilot program that would integrate Vought's messaging into emergency alert systems, allowing affiliate guidance to accompany evacuation notices. The language implied consent through exposure, noting that residents had responded positively to the new signage and would benefit from consistent framing during crises. A civil liberties group requested clarification on the role of an unregistered actor in public communication, and the request was tabled pending the upcoming hearing. In the interim, Vought's legal team provided a template that allowed municipal spokespeople to reference Saitama's ongoing collaboration. On the day of the joint patrol, a staged infrastructure failure was initiated in a district where billboards already carried the quiet protection line, and the crowd gathered with an expectation that had been manufactured by repetition. Homelander arrived first, his presence announced by a sweep of spotlights that had been calibrated to read as spontaneous, and he addressed the situation with the practiced assurance of someone accustomed to defining it. When Saitama reached the site after stopping for discounted noodles, he listened to the briefing as if it were a transit update, then asked where the nearest restroom was. The request was cut from the live feed, but the delay it caused shifted the timing of the collapse. A water main ruptured ahead of schedule, sending a wall of pressure toward a row of storefronts that had not been cleared, and the choreography unraveled into something less manageable. Homelander intercepted a surge with visible strain, holding it long enough for cameras to frame the effort, while Saitama stepped around a barricade to close a valve that someone had left unsecured. The pressure dropped without spectacle, and the storefronts remained intact for reasons that could not be dramatized. The crowd cheered the absence of disaster, which did not belong to anyone. Back in the control room, editors replaced the valve with a reinforced beam for the evening cut, assigning the save to a moment that could be replayed with swelling music. A chyron described coordinated response, and a municipal account retweeted the clip with thanks to affiliate leadership. Homelander requested a debrief that would address the optics of quiet solutions, and the planners agreed to revise future scenarios. The hearing date was moved forward. As night fell, emergency alerts began, including a new line about affiliate guidance during service interruptions, and residents received notifications that paired evacuation routes with Saitama's emblem. He returned home with a bag of noodles and found a second basket of branded snacks outside his door, along with a reminder about the gala he had declined. The city slept under a message it had not voted on, and a system that preferred calm to consent prepared to expand. The first formal inquiry from the Department of Defense did not reference Saitama by name, which allowed everyone involved to pretend the request was procedural rather than personal. But the attachment made the target obvious by listing a sequence of interventions that had been credited to affiliate guidance without corresponding deployment logs. The language asked Vought to clarify whether quiet protection represented a new class of response that could be integrated into federal contingency planning, and it suggested a joint evaluation under controlled conditions. Vought replied with an offer to demonstrate cooperative readiness at a training facility whose observation decks had already been wired for broadcast. The invitation was framed as reassurance for a nervous public, though the seating chart placed uniformed observers in the front row. Saitama attended because the liaison said the cafeteria served curry on Thursdays, and he took a seat beside a stack of informational brochures that described his commitment to structured service in fonts he did not read. A colonel introduced the exercise as a stress test of affiliate coordination, explaining that a simulated drone swarm would provide a scalable challenge for joint response. When asked whether he preferred to stand with the other participants, Saitama asked if the curry line would open before or after the demonstration. The question was noted as an endearing display of humility in a draft release that had been prepared in advance. On a nearby platform, Homelander reviewed the scenario brief with a patience that felt like containment, noting that the swarm's path would allow for a clear display of leadership if resolved in stages. He suggested a cadence that would emphasize hierarchy, with initial containment followed by a decisive finish that would read well on delayed feeds. The planners agreed while adjusting the timing to accommodate a joint close, and the analysts prepared a split-screen package that could highlight cooperation without obscuring authority. The first wave launched as the commentary team described a partnership in motion. The drones descended in a pattern meant to evoke unpredictability without risking actual harm, their trajectories calculated to require visible intervention at regular intervals. Homelander moved first, breaking the formation with a sequence that allowed cameras to savor the effort he chose to show, while a handler gestured for Saitama to take the second cluster. Saitama looked up from the brochure, tapped one of the machines as it passed within reach, and returned to his seat as the swarm's guidance recalibrated around an error it could not categorize. The pattern dissolved in a way that the script had not anticipated, leaving no escalating beats to distribute across the segment. Across the observation deck, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched the live telemetry struggle to reconcile a system that had stabilized itself without a recorded command. The readouts showed interference without source, correction without effort, and a resolution that left no signature for auditors to parse. When the announcer described coordinated containment, Huey compared the timestamp to the frame where Saitama had reached for his phone to check the time. The gap was not small enough to explain. Military observers requested a repeat at higher density, citing the need for actionable data, and the planners obliged with a second wave that entered the zone from multiple vectors. Homelander intercepted a line of descent with practiced force, while Saitama stepped aside to allow a technician to pass, brushing a drone that drifted too close to the railing. The swarm's navigation collapsed into a holding pattern that resembled compliance, and the exercise concluded without the crescendo that had been promised. Applause came from the civilian guests, while the officers began drafting a separate report. In a private room, a general asked Vought whether quiet protection could be formalized as a doctrine that would accompany federal alerts during large-scale incidents. The proposal implied a role for Saitama in national contingency planning, framed as voluntary alignment under corporate oversight. Vought's legal team requested time to evaluate the liability, then circulated a memo that described the opportunity as a pathway to public trust. A follow-up demonstration was scheduled, with expanded parameters. Saitama finished his curry, asked if there were seconds, and left before the debrief began, declining a ride in favor of the bus that stopped 2 blocks away. The evening news described the exercise as a milestone in cooperative safety, and a senator called for hearings on affiliate integration. Homelander requested a closed-door session to address operational clarity, and the request was granted. By nightfall, a draft framework existed that would place quiet protection alongside federal guidance during emergencies, pending a final evaluation. As the facility powered down, a test alert was prepared for a coastal city that had agreed to participate in a pilot, pairing evacuation routes with affiliate reassurance. Vought approved the language while nodding that Saitama's availability would be communicated through established channels. The alert was scheduled for the following week, and a map of potential deployment zones expanded to include regions that had never hosted a soup demonstration. The pilot alert went out on a Tuesday afternoon to a coastal city that had signed a memorandum of cooperation, without fully understanding the clause that allowed affiliate reassurance to accompany evacuation routes. And within minutes, the message began appearing on international feeds as an example of best practice. The text paired familiar instructions with a simple emblem that now carried an implied presence, suggesting that structured calm could be expected even when no deployment had been confirmed. Vought's international division translated the line into 12 languages before the first local official had finished explaining it, and partner networks adopted the format as a low-cost upgrade to their own emergency systems. What had been municipal signage a week earlier was now a template. Saitama saw the alert while waiting in line for discounted cabbage and assumed it was an advertisement because his phone had begun to treat his likeness as a default for public service announcements. When a liaison called to ask whether he would be available for a remote statement to support global rollout, he asked if the call would interfere with dinner and suggested they email instead. The email was drafted without him and released with his name, describing a commitment to shared safety that he had never expressed. Focus groups reported that the brevity made it feel authentic. At Vought Tower, Homelander reviewed a map that now showed quiet protection integrated into alert systems across 3 continents. Its spread driven by municipalities eager to demonstrate partnership with a brand that seemed to reduce panic without demanding spectacle. He framed his concern as a matter of clarity, noting that leadership must be visible when reassurance scaled beyond the local. Executives assured him that joint appearances were being planned for international summits, and a new campaign was drafted to emphasize stewardship at the top of the hierarchy. The editors adjusted the color grading so his presence would anchor the frame. Across a cluttered table, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched foreign broadcasts attribute routine incident stabilization to affiliate guidance, even in regions where Saitama had never been. A train derailment in Eastern Europe was reported as mitigated by quiet protection protocols, and the accompanying footage showed emergency workers following standard procedure beneath an emblem added in post. The narrative was no longer about what he did, but about what his presence allowed people to believe had been done. They began tracking procurement contracts that referenced reassurance as a service. Governments that had hesitated now requested briefings on integration, citing the pilot's impact on public compliance during evacuations. Vought provided a framework that allowed national alert systems to include affiliate language without triggering the oversight applied to independent subs, and a trade delegation announced a summit on cooperative safety. The proposal included a live demonstration to be conducted across time zones, with feeds synchronized to suggest continuity of care. Legal approved the language, while noting that Saitama's participation would be represented through established channels. When asked to record a greeting for the summit, Saitama inquired whether the studio had air conditioning and declined when told the session might run long. The refusal was reframed as ongoing field engagement in a release that praised his dedication to community presence, and a still from the supermarket was captioned as evidence of patrol. The summit proceeded with a voiceover that spoke in his stead, and the applause that followed belonged to the system that had learned to speak for him. Pre-orders for internationally branded emergency kits doubled overnight. Military planners requested a joint exercise that would test cross-border coordination under quiet protection, and the schedule was set for the following month. Homelander asked for a private rehearsal to ensure operational clarity, and the request was granted with a revised script that emphasized leadership under shared doctrine. Analysts noted that reassurance scaled best when it appeared effortless, and the directive was circulated to minimize visible strain in future cuts. The hierarchy was being redesigned for export. As nights settled across different time zones, residents received alerts that paired familiar routes with an emblem that implied calm, and municipal accounts thanked an affiliate who had not been notified. Saitama finished his dinner, muted a notification that used his name, and went to bed while a system expanded around him. The rehearsal for the joint exercise began without a signature, and a draft treaty referenced quiet protection as a public good. The cross-border exercise was designed to prove that quiet protection could function at scale without the friction that usually accompanied multinational deployments, which meant aligning feeds from 3 cities to suggest a seamless response that moved with the sun. Vaught's planners synchronized sirens, staged infrastructure failures that would not quite fail, and timed the release of alerts so that residents in different time zones would feel reassured by the same emblem within the same minute. The commentary team described a doctrine that reduced panic through presence, even when that presence was symbolic, and the networks prepared split screens that would imply continuity across distance. The rehearsal had gone smoothly because it had been rehearsed. Saitama received an itinerary that described a remote check-in to support the opening segment, and he ignored it in favor of a walk to a convenience store that had advertised discounted noodles in the window. When a handler reached him by phone to explain the importance of the moment, he asked whether the store would still be open after the call and suggested they proceed without him if it would not. The line was interpreted as a display of trust in the system, and a spokesperson delivered a brief statement that attributed the day's calm to affiliate alignment. In 3 cities, the emblem appeared beside evacuation routes before anything had gone wrong. In the first city, a bridge closure intended as a visual cue for the exercise coincided with an actual traffic accident that had not been scheduled, and the scripted response began to tangle with reality. Homelander arrived above the span to provide the leadership that the scenario required, his presence framed by a commentary that emphasized hierarchy under pressure. When a secondary collapse threatened to spill into a market street, he intercepted a falling support with visible effort that cameras could translate into reassurance. The applause that followed belonged to the performance. In the second city, a water treatment plant triggered an alert that had been meant for the third, and emergency crews moved according to instructions that now carried an emblem they had not requested. Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched the feeds diverge as local responders attributed routine stabilization to affiliate guidance they had never received. The narrative held because it had been repeated, and the emblem did the work of explanation in the absence of deployment. Resistance took the form of quiet corrections that never trended. In the third city, the staged failure failed too well, rupturing a line that fed an industrial district and sending a pressure wave toward a row of schools that had not been cleared. The synchronized feeds could not hide the mismatch, and the commentary shifted to emphasize adaptability. Saitama, who had boarded a bus after finding the noodle aisle empty, stepped off when the vehicle stalled near the district and followed a cluster of people moving away from a sound they could not place. He asked a security guard where the nearest restroom was, then turned a valve that someone had left unsecured while the cameras searched for a hero shot. The pressure dropped in a way that offered no spectacle, and the evacuation continued without the crescendo that had been planned for the close. Homelander completed his segment in the first city with a decisive finish that returned the script to something usable, while editors in the control room replaced a valve with a reinforced beam for the international cut. The summit's closing remarks praised coordinated doctrine, and procurement officers requested expanded integration. The hierarchy was maintained on paper. Back at Vought Tower, Homelander requested a briefing on the optics of quiet solutions, noting that dominance must be legible when exported across systems that valued calm over command. Executives agreed to revise future scenarios to foreground leadership, even when outcomes depended on actions that could not be dramatized. A campaign was drafted to pair quiet protection with visible stewardship, and a joint appearance was scheduled to clarify the chain of command. The date was announced before Saitama had been asked. As the exercise concluded, a coalition of municipalities filed a petition to formalize affiliate language within national alert protocols, citing improved compliance during evacuations that had not required intervention. Civil liberties groups requested an audit of attribution practices, and the request was deferred pending treaty review. Saitama reached home to find a third basket of branded snacks outside his door, and a reminder about the joint appearance he had not agreed to attend. The event was already trending. By the time the joint appearance was announced, the narrative had already decided what it needed from it, which meant the event's purpose was not to introduce Saitama to the public, but to define his place within a structure that had begun expanding without him. The venue was selected for its sightlines and its ability to support a stage that would place Homelander half a step forward, a detail justified in planning notes as a matter of camera perspective rather than policy. Vaught's messaging described the appearance as a clarification of cooperative doctrine, promising a unified front that would help audiences understand how quiet protection fit beneath established leadership. Invitations were sent to regulators who had been requesting audits, along with a briefing packet that translated calm into compliance. Saitama arrived because the liaison mentioned a buffet, and he stood in a corridor marked for VIP access, while handlers discussed the order in which applause should be encouraged. When asked to wait for his cue, he asked whether the noodles were spicy and was told the menu had been designed for broad appeal. The answer did not seem to concern him, and he nodded when a producer suggested he move toward a backdrop that carried both emblems. The teleprompter displayed a line about shared stewardship that he never read. On stage, Homelander opened with a reassurance that placed quiet protection within a lineage of visible guardianship, explaining that calm must be guided by strength to remain trustworthy. The speech positioned Saitama as an eager partner whose humility complemented decisive leadership, and it invited the audience to see the emblem as a promise delivered through hierarchy. When Saitama was introduced, the applause followed the cue lights rather than the man, and he acknowledged it with the same neutral glance he gave to exit signs. He asked if there would be seconds. The first demonstration paired a simulated transit failure with a timed response that would require Homelander to contain a visible hazard, while Saitama managed a secondary task, a division of labor intended to read as mentorship. The hazard was released on schedule, and Homelander intercepted it with a practice display that cameras could savor, holding the moment long enough for the commentary to frame the effort. Saitama, directed toward a panel that controlled auxiliary systems, pressed a switch that someone had left unsecured and restored power without fanfare. The lights returned before the music swelled. Editors flagged the sequence for replacement, noting that the solution offered no hierarchy to emphasize, and a secondary clip was prepared that substituted a reinforced beam for the panel. The live feed cut to a wide shot that favored Homelander's stance, and the announcer described coordinated containment in language that had been tested overnight. In the front rows, regulators compared the script to their briefing packets and found the alignment reassuring. The audit request was tabled. Across the hall, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched a backstage monitor that still carried the unedited feed, noting how often Saitama's interventions removed the need for anyone to appear in charge. The pattern suggested a problem that could not be solved with staging, because dominance required contrast and contrast vanished when outcomes arrived without effort. They began cataloging the edits that replaced quiet solutions with visible strain. Resistance would have to be built from discrepancies. During the closing segment, a question from an international delegate forced the issue, asking how quiet protection would be governed when deployed across jurisdictions that did not recognize Vaught's oversight. Homelander responded with a promise of stewardship, emphasizing that leadership ensured calm did not become complacency. Saitama was offered the microphone and asked whether the buffet included dessert, which the translator rendered as gratitude for the partnership. The applause returned on cue. After the event, Vought announced a revised framework that formalized quiet protection beneath a supervisory council chaired by Homelander, pending treaty approval. Municipal partners praised the clarity, and procurement officers requested updated guidance for alert integration. A civil liberties coalition filed an injunction citing manufactured attribution, and the hearing was scheduled for the following week. The system moved forward. Saitama left with a small plate and declined a ride, while a press release credited him with endorsing the new hierarchy. Homelander requested a private session to discuss operational optics, and the request was granted. Overnight, the international cut replaced a switch with a beam, and the treaty language expanded to include supervisory stewardship. The injunction was denied on procedural grounds. The fracture did not begin with an explosion, but with a broadcast, because the first nationwide alert to include supervisory stewardship went live during a storm that had not been part of any exercise. The message paired evacuation routes with quiet protection under council oversight, and it reached phones in regions that had never agreed to integration because the treaty language had outpaced ratification. Municipal accounts amplified the notice as a best practice, and partner networks adopted the format without waiting for clarification. In the absence of a deployment, the emblem did what it had been trained to do and implied a presence that could be trusted. At the same time, a grid failure rippled across 3 states when a substation tripped under wind load, sending a cascade toward hospitals that had been added to the pilot without public comment. Homelander arrived above the first facility to provide the leadership the framework required, his appearance framed by commentary that emphasized stewardship during uncertainty. He intercepted a falling transmission line with visible effort that cameras could translate into reassurance, and the applause that followed traveled farther than the outage itself. The Supervisory Council issued a statement about coordinated calm. In a district miles away, Saitama stepped off a train that had stalled between stations and followed a group of commuters toward an access gate someone had left unsecured. When a security guard asked whether affiliate guidance had been dispatched, he said he was just trying to find a restroom and closed a breaker that had been arcing behind a panel. The lights returned in a way that offered no spectacle, and the hospital resumed power before the generators had finished spinning up. The incident report would later credit quiet protection protocols. Across a cluttered table, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched feeds from multiple cities attribute stabilization to supervisory stewardship, even when outcomes arrived before any visible intervention. The pattern suggested a doctrine that could not distinguish between presence and narrative, and the narrative was winning. When a coastal refinery avoided shutdown after a valve was turned by an unidentified individual in a yellow suit, the official release described coordinated response under council guidance. The discrepancy did not trend. The Supervisory Council convened an emergency session to address the spread of alerts beyond ratified zones, and Vought's legal team described the overreach as an implementation error that had nonetheless improved compliance. A revised directive expanded the use of affiliate language during cascading failures, pending formal review. Governments that had hesitated now requested temporary inclusion, citing the storm's impact on public order. The emblem appeared on screens that had never hosted a soup. Homelander requested a live address to clarify the chain of command during multinational outages, and the networks obliged with a primetime slot that promised reassurance at scale. He spoke about guidance and strength, placing quiet protection within a hierarchy that would keep calm from becoming chaos. The message held until a synchronized feed from an unintegrated city showed power returning without any visible deployment, attributed moments later to supervisory oversight. Analysts marked the contradiction and forwarded it to editors. Saitama reached the surface to find a grocery store closing early due to the outage, and he asked whether the sale on eggs would be extended before pushing a jammed door that someone had locked in a hurry. The manager thanked him for restoring the lights, which he had not realized were connected to the breaker he had closed. A bystander posted the moment beneath the emblem, and the clip was picked up by a municipal account within minutes. The official caption referenced council coordination. As night deepened, alerts continued to pair evacuation routes with supervisory language, and regions outside the treaty began receiving guidance they had not approved. A civil liberties coalition filed an emergency appeal, arguing that attribution had become policy without consent, and the hearing was scheduled for dawn. Vought issued a statement praising improved compliance during unprecedented conditions. The fracture widened as reassurance scaled faster than authority. By dawn, the emergency appeal had already been overtaken by events, because the Supervisory Council moved to issue a temporary mandate that would authorize quiet protection language during cascading failures regardless of ratification status. The justification cited the storm's measurable impact on compliance and the reduction in panic observed when the emblem accompanied evacuation routes, framing attribution as a stabilizing public good. Governments that had resisted integration now requested inclusion to avoid being seen as less prepared, and the mandate spread through procurement channels that were not designed for debate. What had been messaging became policy before the hearing could begin. At a hospital still recovering from the night's outage, administrators received a federal advisory that paired generator protocols with affiliate reassurance, instructing staff to follow standard procedure beneath a banner that implied supervisory guidance. Homelander arrived for a scheduled address that had been upgraded to a briefing, his presence framed as continuity amid expansion. He spoke about leadership during uncertainty, placing the mandate within a lineage of stewardship that audiences recognized even as the legal landscape shifted beneath it. The cameras held on a promise that had not been ratified. Miles away, Saitama waited at a crosswalk where the signal had failed and asked a traffic officer whether the buses would resume service once the lights were back on. The officer pointed toward a control box that had been left ajar during the night's repairs, and Saitama pushed it closed with the same absent motion he used to steady a falling beam. The intersection resumed its rhythm without spectacle, and the municipal feed credited quiet protection protocols for restoring flow. A notification used his name to thank commuters for their patience. Across their monitors, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched the mandate attach supervisory language to incidents that resolved before any deployment could be confirmed, converting outcomes into endorsements after the fact. The pattern suggested an attribution engine that did not require presence to function, and the engine was now authorized. When a port avoided shutdown after a pressure alarm cleared on its own, the official release described coordinated calm under council oversight. The discrepancy was filed as anecdotal. In the hearing room, regulators requested an audit of how affiliate reassurance had been attached to unintegrated regions, and Vaught's legal team described the practice as a temporary accommodation pending formal governance. A revised directive expanded the mandate to include international partners during infrastructure stress, citing the need for consistent messaging across supply chains. The vote passed on procedural grounds, and the treaty language was updated to reflect what had already occurred. Quiet protection became a requirement in everything but name. Homelander requested a global address to clarify the mandate's hierarchy, and the networks obliged with synchronized feeds that promised stability at scale. He spoke about guidance, emphasizing that calm required visible leadership to remain trustworthy. The message held until a live cut from an unintegrated district showed power returning without any sign of deployment, attributed moments later to supervisory oversight. Analysts flagged the contradiction and replaced the clip for the international broadcast. Saitama stopped by a convenience store that had reopened under emergency lighting and asked whether the sale on noodles had been extended due to the outage. The clerk thanked him for last night's help, which he did not remember providing, and offered a discount beneath a poster that carried his emblem. He accepted the change and left before a handler could reach him with an invitation to the global address. The release credited him with endorsing the mandate. As evening approached, alerts continued to pair evacuation routes with supervisory language, and regions outside the treaty began integrating quiet protection by default to maintain parity with neighbors. A civil liberties coalition filed a second appeal, arguing that attribution had become governance without consent, and the hearing was scheduled for midnight. Vought issued a statement praising improved compliance during unprecedented conditions. The mandate settled into practice. The midnight hearing opened to a procedural objection that would have delayed any ordinary mandate. But quiet protection was no longer ordinary because the alerts had already been integrated into dispatch systems that did not pause for legal nuance. The appeal argued that supervisory language had become governance without consent, attaching attribution to outcomes that arrived before any deployment could be verified. Vaught's counsel described the practice as a temporary necessity during cascading failures, emphasizing the measurable reduction in panic observed when the emblem accompanied instructions. The judge requested an audit timeline, and the Supervisory Council issued a morning update that expanded usage pending review. Across several cities, emergency services began routing non-critical calls through a reassurance queue that appended affiliate guidance to standard responses, a change justified as a way to maintain calm during infrastructure stress. The shift reduced complaint volume and improved compliance metrics, which procurement officers translated into a cost-saving measure. Residents received notifications that paired routine advisories with supervisory stewardship, and the absence of visible intervention was treated as proof of effectiveness. Quiet protection became the explanation for normalcy. At a municipal operations center, Homelander reviewed a dashboard that now counted stabilization events in the absence of deployment, the totals rising in tandem with mandate adoption. He requested a live briefing to reaffirm leadership during the audit, framing the need as clarity rather than control. The networks obliged with a slot that promised transparency, and the speech placed quiet protection within a hierarchy designed to keep calm from drifting into complacency. The applause arrived on cue. Elsewhere, Saitama followed a group of commuters toward a station where the escalators had stopped, and he asked a maintenance worker whether the buses were running as an alternative. The worker pointed to a panel that had been left open during overnight repairs, and Saitama nudged a relay back into place while checking the time on his phone. The escalators resumed without spectacle, and the transit authorities feed-credited affiliate protocols for restoring access. A notification used his name to thank passengers for their patience. Across their screens, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched Attribution expand to include incidents resolved by maintenance crews before alerts had been issued, converting labor into endorsement after the fact. The pattern suggested a loss that could not be litigated easily, because agency had been redistributed into a narrative that did not require witnesses. When a water district avoided shutdown after a manual override cleared an alarm, the official release described coordinated calm under council oversight. The discrepancy was logged and ignored. The audit began with a request for deployment logs, and the Supervisory Council provided summaries that emphasized outcomes over process, noting that reassurance functioned as a preventive measure. A revised directive authorized affiliate language during routine maintenance in regions that had adopted the mandate, citing improved compliance with advisories. Municipal partners praised the consistency, and international counterparts requested expanded integration to maintain parity. The line between intervention and explanation dissolved. Homelander's briefing closed with a promise of stewardship during uncertainty, and the international cut replaced a live feed that showed power returning in an unintegrated district before any deployment could be confirmed. Analysts marked the substitution and forwarded it for archival, while procurement updated contracts to reflect reassurance as a standing service. The hearing adjourned without a stay, pending further review. Practice continued. Saitama reached home to find a letter from the transit authority thanking him for his contributions to accessibility, along with a voucher for discounted fares beneath a quiet protection emblem. He placed it on the counter beside a basket of branded snacks and opened the window for fresh air. A handler's message about the global address went unanswered. The evening alert used his name again. By nightfall, residents received advisories that paired routine updates with supervisory language, and maintenance reports began including affiliate attribution by default. Civil liberties groups filed a third appeal, arguing that attribution had become ownership without consent, and the docket filled with similar complaints from regions that had never ratified the treaty. Vought issued a statement praising improved compliance during ongoing conditions. The loss settled into record. By the time the final review was scheduled, quiet protection had already been written into operational doctrine across enough jurisdictions that removing it would have required a coordinated rollback of alert systems that now treated supervisory language as a default field. The auditors requested a separation between deployment and attribution, but the dashboards they were given tracked reassurance as a preventive outcome rather than a response, collapsing cause into effect. Municipal partners argued that compliance metrics had improved wherever the emblem appeared, and procurement officers warned that reverting would introduce uncertainty during ongoing infrastructure stress. The recommendation that followed did not repeal the mandate so much as formalize the practice that had grown around it. Vought announced a permanent framework that recognized quiet protection as a public communications layer operating beneath supervisory stewardship, and the networks described it as a modernization of emergency guidance for a complex age. Homelander delivered a global address that placed the framework within a lineage of visible guardianship, promising clarity where confusion had once thrived. The speech emphasized leadership at scale, noting that calm must be guided to remain trustworthy across borders. The applause arrived from regions that had never hosted a soup. Across a transit hub, Saitama stepped around a sign that thanked him for maintaining accessibility and asked a clerk whether the sale on noodles had been extended due to the week's disruptions. The clerk pointed toward a poster that carried his emblem and offered a discount as a gesture of appreciation. He accepted the change and left without noticing the camera that framed his departure as outreach. The evening advisory used his name to reassure commuters about routine delays. In a small operations room, Billy Butcher and Huey Campbell watched Attribution expand to include seasonal maintenance and staffing shortages, converting normalcy into endorsement across regions that had never ratified the treaty. The pattern suggested a permanence that could not be undone by appeal, because governance had migrated into language that did not require consent to function. When a coastal district avoided flooding after a sluice gate was closed by night staff, the official release described coordinated calm under council oversight. The discrepancy did not matter. International partners updated their protocols to include quiet protection during routine advisories, citing parity with neighboring systems that had adopted the framework. Civil liberties groups continued to file objections, but the docket filled with requests for inclusion from municipalities that feared being left behind. The line between intervention and explanation dissolved into practice, and practice hardened into policy. Attribution became infrastructure. Homelander requested a final briefing to outline stewardship under the permanent framework, and the networks obliged with synchronized feeds that promised stability without spectacle. He spoke about guidance, placing the emblem within a hierarchy that would keep calm from drifting into complacency. The message, held as a live cut from an unintegrated district, showed traffic resuming after a signal box was closed by a passerby in a yellow suit, attributed moments later to supervisory oversight. Analysts archived the contradiction. Saitama returned home to find a revised contract that recognized his contributions to public reassurance, along with a basket of branded snacks and a voucher for discounted utilities. He left the envelope unopened and placed the snacks on the counter beside a transit letter that thanked him for last week's help. A handler's invitation to a commemorative gala went unanswered. The nightly alert used his name again. By morning, quiet protection appeared on screens that had never carried a brand, pairing routine updates with supervisory language across regions that had not voted on its inclusion. Residents followed evacuation routes that were not evacuations and accepted delays that were not disasters, reassured by a presence that did not need to be present. Governments updated guidance to reflect what had become normal, and procurement renewed contracts for reassurance as a standing service. The world did not return to how it had been, because calm now arrived with a logo.